this is Little Green Ghouls, and welcome back to Goosebumps Revisited, a series where I break down a classic Goosebumps book and any episode that goes along with it. I will also be telling up some Goosebumps cliches and classic moments. This week, I'm excited to visit The Haunted Mask 2. I've been looking forward to this book because it's one I used to own and I have pleasant memories of. The first Haunted Mask is still one of my top Goosebumps books, and I think the sequel does a nice job using the same concept in a slightly different way. The book almost becomes more of a horror about aging and being old, but it still has a lot of the same charm as the first. I think this is the best sequel so far, and definitely worth checking out if you haven't yet. I think this is another great cover. While rereading the story this weekend, I realized just how true Jacobs' illustration was to Stine's description in the book, right down to the spiders in the hair and the patch of exposed bone. This is just a very solid cover with the blue and orange, and might actually be one of my favorites. The 2004 slime border goes with orange and green, which I think is a slight downgrade. It just ends up being too much of one color, but I do like that it's pumpkin colored for a Halloween themed book, so there are pros and cons I suppose. I was surprised that the 2018 cover is better than the last attempt they made on the original Haunted Mask book. At least this time we actually get a proper look at the mask. I also like that it sticks pretty close to Stine's description, but I continue to be biased by nostalgia and prefer the 1995 version. I didn't spot any Haunted Mask 2 merchandise, and I think there probably has to be at least a couple things out there. I did like the advert for the Goosebumps fan club though, because for the low price of $8.95 plus $2 shipping and handling, we're offered a Goosebumps watch, bandana, water bottle, sticker sheet, pencils, erasers, and a subscription to the official newsletter. So all of that seems like a bargain to me. Too bad the offer expired on September 30th, 1996. Our front tag says, "New face, old nightmare," which is a nice glimpse to what this book basically is. Our back tag says, "Just call him Prune Face," which is certainly something, but let's get to the blurb on the back. Steve Boswell will never forget Carly Beth's Halloween mask. It was so gross, so terrifying. But this year, Steve wants to have the scariest costume on the block, so he gets a mask from the same store Carly Beth got hers. It looks like a creepy old man, with stringy hair, a wrinkled face, and spiders crawling out of the ears. Steve's definitely got the scariest mask around. Too bad he's starting to feel so old, and so tired, and so evil. Okay, let's start the summary. The book opens with our reintroduction to Steve Boswell, who is one of Carly Beth's frenemies from the first book, so it's an interesting choice to make him a protagonist for this one. I get the sense that we'll enjoy watching him suffer as a result. Steve opens the book with, "First graders are animals." And you know what? He's not wrong. I've always liked Recess's take on the younger grades, especially the kindergartners.
Yeah, let's... What the hell? Help! Get me down from here! Ow! Ow! You're not as good as that! Even they can't seem to agree.
Why is Steve talking about first graders, you may be wondering? Well, he's being forced to coach the first grade soccer team as punishment for releasing a squirrel into the girls' locker room with his friend Chuck, so we can already see that Steve hasn't changed all that much. You have to remember, this is the same boy that fed Carly Beth a live worm, so keep the expectations low for him. Every day, Steve prays for rain, because that means he won't have to coach the Hogs, which is the team name the kids voted on. I think they get points for creativity. These kids really are wild though, because right away Steve's being swarmed by first graders, zombie style, and one even spits their gum into his ear somehow. The pack of monster children end the chapter by tricking Steve into kicking a concrete soccer ball. So yes, these first graders located a round chunk of concrete, painted it like a soccer ball, rolled it out onto the field, and then baited Steve into kicking it as hard as he could. So they're kind of awful. As Steve is limping home, he runs into Chuck, and the two discuss possibly getting revenge on the Hogs. Steve stops to check out his backpack because it feels funny. He opens it and discovers the Hogs have poured in a mixture of glue and feathers, so Steve is feeling extra bloodthirsty now. We jump to a few days later, and Steve once again is walking home from a violent soccer practice, where this time he was headbutted at full speed. He then spots Carly Beth and her best friend Sabrina. Chuck suggests they sneak up and scare them, because he just loves Carly Beth's screams. Steve also rewrites history a bit by saying Chuck fed her the worm, but I remember the truth. Seeing Carly Beth has inspired Steve to get a scary mask of his own, since her mask last year scared the absolute shit out of him. He also mentions how after last Halloween, Carly Beth has changed and now nothing scares her, so yay for trauma. The boys pop out from behind the tree and startle the girls, only to get startled in return as Carly Beth's head falls off onto the ground. Apparently Carly Beth spotted them and just so happened to have her plaster head from show and tell in art class that day, so she managed to tuck her head into her jacket and stuff it up through the collar to pull off this reverse prank. Points for acting quickly, I guess. It's a little bit contrived. Steve begs Carly Beth to tell him where she got the mask from, but she refuses and reminds us of all the plot points from the last book, how the mask was alive, it possessed her, and it wouldn't come off. Carly Beth tries her best to save Steve from himself, but he takes the plaster head hostage until she finally gives in, but she warns him multiple times that he's being an idiot. We jump to the next day for some more time with the Hogs. This time Steve is wearing his best sweater for school picture day, and as a result the Hogs have gotten it caked with mud. Stine gets self-referential and has Chuck comment that Steve looks like Mud Monster, so +1 for the Goosebumps cinematic universe. After practice, Steve and Chuck make it over to the party store where Carly Beth got her mask, only to discover that the store is closed for good. Chuck suggests they just go to Kmart, but that isn't good enough for Steve. Poor Kmart, the 90s really were its final glory days. Steve is almost ready to go home defeated when he notices an open trapdoor in the alley leading to the basement of the party store. He peers in and sees some boxes and assumes that they might have some masks in them, so the only logical thing to do now is commit some theft. Chuck tries his best to remind Steve on the basics of the law, but it doesn't work. After a few failed boxes, they finally come across a box containing the nasty masks. Steve immediately notices that the masks are strangely warm, but that doesn't stop him. He eventually takes a liking to this one. I pulled out an ugly mask of a leering old man, his mouth twisted in an evil grin, one long crooked tooth stuck down over his lower lip. The mask had long stringy yellow hair that drooped over an old man's craggly forehead. I could see big black spiders climbing in the hair, and in the ears. A chunk of forehead was missing, revealing a patch of gray skull underneath. Not bad, I thought. This one even smelled bad. Just when Steve is feeling satisfied with his potential choice, he hears footsteps upstairs. He turns to Chuck, but Chuck has already booked it out of there. Before Steve can even move, the ceiling lights kick on and he's confronted with the strange caped man from the first book. Steve thinks the caped man looks like an old school vampire, but the man doesn't try to bite him, instead he just lectures him on the obvious. It's wrong to break into stores and steal shit, even if that store is seemingly out of business. Steve insists he wasn't going to steal anything, just look, but the old man stops him to let him know that the masks aren't for sale anyways because they're special. Steve is literally like, please take my money. The cape man tells him again no because the masks are too real and wants Steve to come upstairs so he can call his parents. Or the police, whatever is easier. At the mention of consequences for his actions, Steve decides to race for the trapdoor to escape with the mask. He reaches the door, but it's stuck shut in a chapter cliffhanger as the cape man has him cornered. Steve decides to give the door one good shoulder shove and it bursts open, allowing him to escape with the mask. Steve is hauling ass across the street and almost gets hit by a car as a result because he forgets to look both ways. That's when Chuck reappears from behind a tree, and together the boys race home. Steve lies to Chuck about having the mask, so only Steve knows about his little crime. Once home, he goes to pull out his mask from under his sweatshirt when something bites him on the tit. He concludes he must just be jumpy from his escape, but we the reader know better and are aware this is a sequel for a reason. He gets chewed out by his mom for a few pages for being so late, but then he gets to admire his mask alone. He particularly likes the wormhole and the big tooth that's jutting out. I like that the cover art really matches the mask in the book closely. I smoothed out his long strings of yellow-white hair. Holding it by the big pointy ears, I lifted it in front of my face and examined it closely. A single white tooth hung down over the bottom lip. A brown wormhole poked through the center of the tooth. The mouth was twisted in an evil sneer. The lips curled like two brown worms. The long nose had gobs of green dripping from each nostril. A patch of skin was missing from just above the forehead. I could see gray skull bone in the hole. The whole face was creased and lined. The flesh was sickly green. The skin appeared to be peeling off the face. Dark scabs bulged from the sunken cheeks. Black spiders appeared to crawl around with the stringy yellow hair. Spiders poked out of two of the ears. Yuck, I cried. He goes to put it on, but gets called down to dinner at the last second. He then spends the rest of the chapter daydreaming about the chaos he's going to cause. We jump to more hog time, and only one more day to Halloween. The kids are terrible as usual, but Steve doesn't even mind because revenge is on the horizon. He tells the horrible hogs that they're going to have a special Halloween party after practice tomorrow, so they all need to show up in their costumes and we'll meet outside the old carpenter mansion. The hogs are hesitant about the location because everybody knows that that old mansion is haunted, but he convinced them after calling them a bunch of fraidy cats. He races home to admire his mask, but when he opens the sock drawer, he realizes in horror that it's gone in a chapter cliffhanger. This ends up being a particularly lame fake out because he just forgot that he moved it earlier. One thing I was enjoying about this book was that it wasn't flooding the chapter endings with shitty cliffhangers, it was just letting the action happen naturally. But all good things come to an end, I guess. He locates the mask in the closet and decides he can't wait for Halloween, he needs to scare someone now. He settles on Chuck and slips the mask on. Immediately he knows something isn't right because he can feel the mask grow tighter and hotter until it feels like it's actually burning him. He also notices a putrid odor coming from the mask. He tries to yank off the mask, but he's suddenly very tired and weak. He hunches over trembling and realizes what he's feeling is old, like an old little man. He looks in the mirror and he's impressed with how good he looks, despite all the horrible things he's feeling. He decides he just needs to take some deep breaths to calm down, and then goes to practice his cackle, but the cackle that comes out doesn't belong to him and it's much more frightening than his efforts ever were. The chapter then abruptly ends with something grabbing his leg. I thought this would be Chuck, but no, it's the family dog Sparky tearing into Steve's leg. He tries to comfort the scared dog, but his old man voice just makes things worse, and Sparky goes racing out of the room. Steve is still feeling feeble, and decides Chuck is just gonna have to wait till tomorrow. He goes to remove the mask, and relives the exact scene poor Carly Beth did. He can't find the bottom of the mask, and frantically begins tugging at his old dry skin in hopes of it coming loose. He even goes for his eyes, but that fails too. He hears his mom coming home, but for some reason doesn't want her help. At this point, I'd be racing to my mom for help, stolen mask or not. He shuts the door in her face and tells her he's not feeling well. She tries to give him a delicious black and white cookie, but he rejects it and won't let her in. He has an actual good idea and decides to call Carly Beth for help, but this doesn't go as planned because once her father answers the phone, he refuses to give it to Carly Beth because he wants to know why some strange old man is wanting to talk to his preteen daughter. Steve saying that he's a friend of Carly Beth was the wrong answer, and her dad hangs up on him. Steve then falls asleep in his chair like a proper old man, only to wake up to his parents trying to get him to come down for dinner. He convinces them that he's sick, and they leave him alone for the rest of the night, but poor Steve is really going through it. I scratched my ears. I could feel the spiders crackling around in them. I touched the bare spot on the top of my head where my skin was ripped apart. The skin was soft and wet. I could feel the hard patch of skull that showed through. I appreciate the commitment to body horror this book has going on. Although, as soon as I praise the book, Stine goes and commits one of the worst book offenses, a big fat dream fake-out. Steve spends an entire chapter thinking he woke up the next morning to discover all of this was a dream and he never stole the mask and turned into an old man, only to wake up and realize that, nope, that was just a dream. He's still an old man and that was just some good old-fashioned book padding. He shuffles out of bed in his old man body and discovers a note outside his bedroom door that reads, "Dear Steve, hope you're feeling better. Mom and I had to go visit your Aunt Helen this morning. We left early to beat the traffic. We'll be home in time to help you with your hobo costume. Love, Dad." These are some world-class parents. Their son is sick the night before, they haven't once checked on him, and then they just skip town without ever laying eyes on their kid. I'd be pissed to know where I rank compared to Aunt Helen, apparently. He then has a sudden craving for oatmeal with a glass of warm milk, and realizes he's even starting to think like an old man now. I've never been able to comprehend how people drink warm milk, like just the thought of that makes me nauseous. Steve decides to make the best of his situation and plans on spending the rest of the day as an old man, scaring the horrible hogs and then locating Carly Beth for help. His parents return that night and are amazed at how ugly and realistic his costume is, especially now that he's paired it with his hobo costume and his grandpa's old cane. He shuffles out the door, even though he still feels weak and sore, but he's fueled by the power of revenge. On his way to the Carpenter Mansion, he gets great satisfaction out of scaring two little girls who happen to be passing by when he shouts, "Get out of my way," at them. He then spots his horrible hogs, dressed in the perfect 90s costumes because we have Ninja Turtles, Power Rangers, a Beauty, and a Beast. He shuffles over to the kids so they all can get a look at how hideous he is, but this just backfires on him because the horrible hogs are actually a group of good Samaritans at heart and are concerned about this old man's health. They ask if he needs help crossing the street or if maybe he's just lost. Steve tries to scare them by saying he's the ghost of Carpenter Mansion and goes to strangle one of the kids, but just drops his cane and falls over by accident. The horrible hogs help him up and Steve finally gives up and just decides to go locate Carly Beth. The horrible hogs actually end up walking Steve to Carly Beth's house, which is kind of funny, because Steve is just given in to being old at this point. Carly Beth shows up, but right away thinks Steve is the old creep her father warned her about from the phone call earlier. She walks away quickly, but turns around once he's able to shout out that it's him, Steve. Carly Beth immediately clocks that Steve went to the party store like she told him not to, and knows that that mask must be stuck, but she's also the bearer of bad news because she's not sure they can get it off. She updates Steve on how these aren't masks, they're living faces called the Unloved, that the Caped Man made in a lab because he's the Goosebumps mad scientist. She informs Steve that she was able to get her mask off with the symbol of love, which was the plaster head her mom made of her, but she doesn't know if something like that will work for Steve. Probably because no one loves Steve. Steve has an idea though, but he won't share what it is as he and Carly Beth head back to his house. They reach the house and banter with Steve's mom on how ugly Steve is before reaching their goal, the black and white cookies his mom bought him earlier, because she drove 2 miles out of her way to get those for him. He thinks one bite of that cookie and the mask will slide right off. His mom shits all over this plan though when she reveals that Sparky found the cookies earlier and gobbled them up. Carly Beth gets creative and thinks maybe Sparky is the symbol of love since the dog loves Steve so much. He goes to pick up Sparky and after a minute of dog squeezing, still nothing happens. They finally resort to having to return to the party store to see if the Caped Man can help them, because maybe this mask requires something besides a symbol of love to get it off. They reach the store, which is still abandoned, but decide to enter through the trapdoor in the alley anyways, because at this point, what does Steve have to lose? They dig through boxes in hopes of finding something that can help them. This seems pretty futile to me, but Carly Beth ends up finding a box of costumes that makes Steve's face tingle. She pulls out a spider-covered tuxedo and deduces this must be the full costume that goes with the mask. The closer she gets with the tuxedo, the more Steve's face begins to itch before it turns into a full-on burning sensation. Eventually, the mask peels itself off of Steve and floats over to the tux, which begins flopping around once the mask lands on the tuxedo collar. The old man mask, now equipped with a full tuxedo body, jumps up, does a little dance, and races out the trapdoor into the night. The kids just stare in shock until they end up bursting into laughter. They leave the basement and dance and laugh all the way home, because although they may have released an evil old man into the world, at least Steve is free. However, on their way home, they're suddenly attacked by a creature. The creature leapt up from behind the hedge. It opened its jaws in a broken-toothed roar. Carly Beth and I grabbed each other and uttered shrill cries of terror. The creature had bright purple skin that glowed in the light of the street lamp, fiery red eyes, a mouthful of broken, rotting teeth, and a fat brown worm poking from the middle of its cheek. Steve realizes it's Chuck, and then Chuck gives us our last page twist. He also stole a mask before racing up the stairs, but surprise, surprise, he's now having a little trouble taking the mask off himself. And that's how this one ends. A little predictable, but nothing terrible. The Haunted Mask 2 replaces our original Steve with John White, who we already talked about during Cuckoo Clock of Doom, who ended up to be in all those terrible American Pie sequels. So let's start the episode. An intro featuring Stine means we're already starting out strong.
Whoa. Hello. I'm R.L. Stine. I write the Goosebumps books. Viewers beware. You're in for a scare.
Carly Beth is the Goosebumps OG. Sabrina is the Goosebumps OG best friend.
Thanks, Sabrina.
Yeah, thanks.
This mask remains terrifying. We have some special effects. You literally had all year to do this. A prime example of why procrastination is bad.
I must hurry.
This is nothing like the book so far, but I'm liking it anyways. We have some foreshadowing even.
The years go by, and before you know it, you're a drooling, disgusting old man.
I would not follow this man.
Hey, mister! Where'd you get that mask?
For a second, I thought he was peeping directly into the wood. It's a screen.
For business. I gotta get home and get ready for tonight. You gotta get in your pirate stuff.
It's beautiful.
Cool.
I always like when the mask tightens itself in these episodes.
Yes!
It's like Halloween, Season of the Witch. His nemesis, the plaster head. Carly Beth, again, is the OG.
Do the duck walk, Carly Beth. I love that.
Why would anyone walk over to this gurgly-ass voice?
Over here.
This doesn't have the oomph that the original mask had.
Don't be afraid, fellow. Come closer.
Oh, it feels like skin. Dry old skin.
He's awful agile for an old man.
Steve, are you nuts?
This is how I eat Halloween candy too.
I hate mints. Alright, would you quit doing that voice?
So?
You're disgusting.
Oh, maybe he is aging.
I can't catch my breath.
I want to know what old people are running around looking like this.
Thirsty.
Look at that old man.
I think spiders in the ears were my favorite gross part of the book. Damn it, this kid calling him some old drunk.
Take it off.
Let's go. He's just some old drunk.
And they call him smelly.
Oh, you smell, mister.
I'm enjoying all the transformation scenes.
I'm an old man. It can't be. It has to be a dream.
I like that the mask is missing eyes this time around. This episode is super different from the book with all this Carly Beth's head stuff.
Now the mask and you are one. Bring it to me.
Bring what?
The head of Carly Beth.
He's having a Cinderella moment. Well, that sounds unpleasant.
Your eyes will turn to pus.
Now I'd really want to smash it.
Help me. Please, help me.
Jump scare. More special effects. This was a bit anticlimactic. Just don't breathe it in. Time for one last scare. Good for you, Sparky. Good night, Stine.
My favorite. Good night, everyone.
Overall, I thought The Haunted Mask 2 was a very solid sequel. I think I enjoyed this sequel the most so far, but again, the bar is basically on the ground. Steve is fairly likable despite being an asshole, and it's nice to watch him learn some lessons the hard way. This book also moves at a nice pace, and it kind of felt like a quicker read than normal. The highlights are easily the pages describing Steve's transformation into an old man, and the events that take place after. It has its low points too though, with an unnecessary dream fake out, and the removal of a mask by just giving it the rest of the costume is kind of a letdown, as well as having the final twist just be Chuck in a mask. I'm gonna give this one 4 out of 5 black and white cookies. I think this could have been a 5-star book if a little more effort had been put into the conclusion. Okay, on to our totals. The Haunted Mask 2 didn't have any vomit or shoulder scares, but it did have pretty much everything else. In Getting Jay with the 90s, we had 4 90s moments. These included Kmart, Power Rangers, Ninja Turtles, and Beauty and the Beast. This raises our total to 126 jiggy 90s moments. Asshole Victim made its triumphant return with 2 more victims for the count. These are of course Steve and Chuck, who both get to learn some lessons from the mask despite Carly Beth's warnings. This raises our total to 22. In It's a Prank Bro, I counted 3 pranks. These included the concrete soccer ball, a backpack full of feathers, and when Carly Beth reverse pranks Steve with a plaster head scare. This brings our series total to 84 It's a Prank Bros. It's Only a Dream also made a return, and it's probably my least favorite Stine cliche. It was especially egregious in this book with a wasted chapter on how Steve actually never stole the mask after all. Just kidding, he did. We just needed to fill a few pages. This raises our series total to 13. The Haunted Mask 2 was a little light on the chapter cliffhangers with a total of 9. I thought this book was largely a refreshing change of pace from our recent cliffhanger heavy books. This raises our Goosebumps total to 445. The clunky cliffhanger word for this book is going to be chapters 13 to 14, where Steve thinks the mask is gone from the sock drawer. Oh wait, he just moved it himself earlier and forgot. Shocker ending. Our big twist for this book really wasn't that big, but a twist nonetheless. We have Chuck revealing that he also stole a mask from the shop and now can't get it off. This brings our Goosebumps series total to 29. Well, that's it for the Haunted Mask 2. This book was kind of a retread of the original, but I still found it enjoyable. I think it was smart to make the horror of this mask be prematurely aging into a feeble old man. It still doesn't beat Carly Beth going full demon though, but I had fun with it. Next week we have The Headless Ghost, which I never read and know nothing about. Let me know in the comments what you thought of the Haunted Mask 2. Which book did you prefer, the first or the second? What was your favorite mask? What do you think happened with the old man at the end? Also, what did you think of my various age horror or possession clips this week? I was mostly excited to feature demons again, now that I have a better understanding of how to edit them in, because I'm pretty sure I used them in my very first Welcome to Deadhouse video. Anyways, as always, thanks again for watching, and make sure you subscribe for
The pride. The love.